My name is Maria McCormack, and I'm a teacher at the American Language Program, and this is my colleague, Babi Kruchin. And she's also teaching at the American Language Program. And today the title of our presentation is Beyond Grammar, Assessing Critical Thinking in Source-Based Writing. Got a bit of a tough act to follow. Thank you very much, conference organizer. Okay, so we're going to be delving a little bit more into the topic of critical thinking in writing during our presentation. Because as teachers, and my background is also in language assessment, we find it very natural to be able to objectively evaluate students' grammar, vocabulary, and even their organization. But sometimes when it comes to giving systematic and useful feedback and being able to assess objectively students' content, their ideas, the development of their ideas, I find that more of a challenge, and I think that's more of a challenge for many teachers. So we were wondering whether a rubric could help teachers assess critical thinking in essay content and also provide richer feedback to students. The inspiration for this idea came from a study published in the journal Assessing Writing in 2012 by Saxton, Belanger, and Becker. And the title of the article is The Critical Thinking Analytic Rubric, which I'm just going to call the STAR. Investigating intra-rater and inter-rater reliability of a scoring mechanism for critical thinking performance assessments. Now, Judy mentioned earlier in her presentation that she has questions about assessing critical thinking, assessing the construct of critical thinking using a multiple choice examination. And in fact, a lot of people have that same question because there's the creation of a product in a performance assessment, the creation, the chance to utilize higher thinking skills and to actually create something that we can't capture in multiple choice testing. So this particular study was using a rubric for, helping to develop a rubric for a large-scale performance assessment, meaning a writing assessment where the students actually have to write something, in Oregon. It was a statewide writing assessment. So there was a large-scale study. They had 306 high school seniors. Yes, so they were looking to build a validity argument for a statewide writing assessment. And their actual rubric was several pages long. It's quite daunting, quite detailed. So I'm just giving you a taste of the rubric components for now. We'll explain them more in depth as we go along. So they drew upon, for defining critical thinking, because that's where any assessment has to start, is with the definition of the construct. They went back to the American Philosophical Association's Delphi, so-called Delphi report from the late 1980s. It was published in 1990, which identified these six components of critical thinking, where interpretation is seen as understanding and accurately conveying meaning of information from various sources and points of view. So in terms of their assessment, let me just describe one form of their actual tasks, just to kind of ground this a bit. So in their assessment, the students would read conflicting or contrasting or slightly different points of view about a controversial topic, and then they would have to write about that, evaluating, analyzing, and making the case for which method they would choose when applied to a particular context. So one version of the test called on the students to read a little reading packet consisting of readings by Ernesto Che Guevara on using violence to affect social change, and another reading was by Mohandas Gandhi. And then the essay question asked them, after reading these two sources, and then they had also discussed other methods as well. But after reading these two sources, here's the situation. It's 2016, 2017, and a big terrorist attack has just occurred in the state of Washington, and the U.S. government has cracked down on people who share the same ethnic background as the terrorists. Sort of reminds you of the Japanese internment situation that Judy discussed. So your best friend happens to share this ethnic background, and her privacy is being invaded, her civil liberties are being taken away. You feel the need to act. Based on these different sources that you have read, how would you go about it? What do you think would be the most appropriate way to go about affecting social change and protecting your friend? So interpretation in this case would just be, did you get it? Did you understand the readings? Like the Che Guevara and the Mohandas Gandhi. So that would be sort of like the comprehension part of it. And then the analysis would be examining the relationship among different sources, as well as comparing and contrasting different points of view. How are they different? How are they similar? Basically, the analysis. Evaluation would be judging the credibility of sources and the logic of statements. So this would be measuring the student's ability to evaluate Che Guevara's arguments. Are they fallacious? Are there questions that I have about them? The same with Mohandas Gandhi. Okay, so their ability to sort of step back and critically look at those ideas after they've contrasted and compared them. Inference would be making realistic predictions, drawing rational conclusions within a context, and deducing logical implications. So here is where we're looking at the student's ability to apply the key concepts from the readings to this new situation, this new hypothetical situation of the terror attack in Washington and the resulting loss of civil liberties. Explanation is sort of kind of like the bread and butter of composition writers, composition teachers. How do you support your arguments? So this is using evidence and reasoning to support an argument. So stating your thesis and then supporting that with evidence from the sources and also your own information. And finally, the last component is called disposition. And it's gone. Okay. The last component is called disposition. And the Saxton and Belanger, the writers of the study that was our inspiration for our classroom research, said that whereas the first 5 components, interpretation, analysis, evaluation, inference, and evaluation, those are cognitive skills. But disposition is an affective component. It's actually something separate. It's more attitudinal. And it is diligence in seeking relevant information, reasonableness in selecting and applying criteria, care in focusing attention on the concern at hand. So as a language tester, when I read that, I think, oh, operationalizing that is going to be very tricky. It's very hard to measure something of that nature, but we think we did, right? We think we did. All right. So just to pin each of these back to that original essay topic that was in the study. So inference, yes, I did that. Inference, applying it to the new situation. Explanation, providing support for the student's argument for which method would be more appropriate in the context of Washington State. And then disposition. So now I'm going to turn it over to Babi, and she's going to tell you about how we did a little classroom research to test out this rubric.
Hi. So basically we found out that, okay, this sounds good, but we need to use it in the classroom to see if it holds true to our teaching. So with the students, they first needed to learn this rubric, or this, they needed, not that they didn't have the cognitive skills, but we needed to teach them which cognitive skills they were going to use when writing. What do I do when I give support? I'm explaining why I think this is right. What do I do when I get to a hypothetical conclusion? I am inferencing, so on and so forth. So we did that through reading. And then, and it was a reading on racism that you are going to do. So then after they've learned this rubric through reading, in other words, it's a writing by Nicholas Kristof, and they had to identify what are the skills that Nicholas Kristof is using in his writing. After that, they had to apply these skills to another text that was not on racism. So please briefly just skim through this text. I'll stop talking. Okay. So can I have everybody's attention again? I think you can if you have it. But anyway, I think we would all agree that Kristof's main point is that even though there has been a lot of progress in race relations, there is still unconscious racism in America. Do we all agree on that? Yeah. Okay. So, if we look at the first paragraph of his writing, so this is what I did with the students. We read that text, and we learned the rubric, and then we went paragraph by paragraph, and we thought, which cognitive skill is this writer using? So here, at the beginning, if we read, some white Americans may be surprised to hear Archbishop Tutu describe Bryan Stevenson, an African-American lawyer fighting for racial justice, as Americans' young Nelson Mandela. Huh? Why do we need a Mandela over here? We've made so much progress on race over 50 years. And who is this guy Stevenson anyway? So we came to the conclusion that this was analysis. In other words, Kristof is contrasting his view that racism is still prevalent and the view of Americans who say we don't have racism anymore. We had the civil rights movement. It doesn't exist anymore, right? So we're going to go over, I'm going to do 2 more paragraphs. Any questions we all agree that he's analyzing, contrasting his two opposing views. So can we have the next slide, please? So when I was born in 1959, the hospital in which I arrived had separate floors for black babies and white babies, and it was then illegal for blacks and whites to marry in many states. So progress has been enormous, and America today is nothing like the apartheid South Africa that imprisoned Mandela. Which of the cognitive skills do you think he is bringing into this paragraph?
You might want to whisper to your neighbor.
You whisper it to your neighbor, yes. What do you think?
Applying it to different situations.
Which one?
He's applying the principle to a different situation. Exactly as you said that.
Right, so in the 50s, he's talking about the 50s. But inference is more hypothetical or drawing a conclusion. Any explanation? He's explaining something. He's basing it on facts, right? So different babies, different floors. But what argument is his explanation getting to? What is the argument? It's very explicit in this paragraph. Progress has been made, right? So the United States is nothing like the apartheid in South Africa. So if he believes there is still racism, this is actually, the whole paragraph is this position, because he's visiting the other side. He's saying, yes, you are right, there has been progress. And this is the explanation why there was progress. Can we agree on that? Yes? So yes, they overlap. There is explanation, there is interpretation, because he had to interpret the facts. And in order to visit this attitude, this attitude to see the other point of view, the opposing point of view, to create your own argument. So this position. So let's do one more. Just the part that is darker. After the shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, I wrote a couple of columns entitled "When Whites Just Don't Get It." The reaction to those columns, sometimes bewildered, resentful, or imprintable, suggests to me that many whites in America don't understand the depth of racial inequity lingering in this country. So whisper to your neighbor, what cognitive skill is Christoph writing in this last sentence? So we thought it was, here is a clear example of inference, because, and we went back and forth a lot when they are not clear cut and they overlap, but the language suggests to me, and from what went on in Ferguson, I conclude that, hang on, there is still a lot of racism in this country, right? So he inferred based on the situation. And the last one, again, the whole paragraph, those of us who are right and in the middle class rarely see this side of the justice system. The system works for us, and it's easy to overlook how deeply it is skewed against the poor or members of minority groups. So this is the part that I want you to think about, which cognitive skill is this. Yet consider drug rap. Surveys overwhelmingly find that similar percentages of blacks and whites use illegal drugs. Yet the Justice Department says that blacks are arrested for such drug offenses at 3 times the rate of whites. So what is this part of the paragraph? And this is the last one, the last quiz. Just talk to the person sitting next to you.
Evaluation?
It is evaluation, because he is taking a stand on that, but because it is numbers, right? 3 times, 3 times the times the rate of whites. He's using data, he's using support to illustrate his point of view. And yes, his point of view is evaluating because he's saying, no, this is wrong. Racism has not been eradicated. Yeah, so they overlap. It's not right or wrong, but it's the ability to see, writers support what they say. Writers infer, and so on and so forth. So the road to good writing is reading, and but we need to point different things out. And so here we're pointing cognitive skills. So the next thing the students did, so we ended our unit on racism, and we moved to poverty, because so we're following Judy's footsteps. We want to deal with big things. So anyway, we moved on to poverty, and we wanted to talk about ways of eradicating poverty, and it would lead to creativity, and so they would. That was the experiment. This is the essay they had to write, which we used the rubric to assess, not racism but poverty. So before they wrote, we wanted them to read 3 different texts with 3 different models of eradicating poverty. One was a listening about Give Directly, which is an organization that in Africa gives cash to the poor, no strings attached, and which aim to eradicate poverty. The second one is about Rescue Mission, which is an organization in the US that collects money from donors and then gives goods to the poor, such as food and clothing. And the third is they watched a short video on the Grameen Bank, which you all know is a microfinance organization in Bangladesh that gives microloans to especially women for them to start their own businesses. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So they were exposed to these 3 models, and then they had to write. However, when we have, as Judy pointed out, when you want the students to use their critical thinking skills, you need to create a prompt that lends itself to using these skills. Or we could just say, what is the most effective way to eradicate poverty? The Grameen Bank. Flawless. Good job. Great essay, 2 words. So they have to justify what their opinions are. So I'll show you the prompt. Oh, sorry. Backtrack. Before they had to write, we had to make sure they understood what they had read and listened to, and they had found out the differences and similarities. So in other words, interpretation and analysis in our rubric. So there is a hyperlink that I don't expect you to read that, but just, can you click on that? So basically, they had to write, it's what we call summarizing and paraphrasing the 3 methods. And if you scroll down, more down, then they have to find differences and similarities among these methods for eradicating poverty.
So Babi scaffolded that part of the rubric in the classroom before the students wrote.
So after they had done that, we went to the assignment. So I, inspired by the study, I created a prompt that would have them use the skills. Identify and define in your own words the views we studied for eradicating poverty. Interpretation. What is the reasoning for their chosen method? Compare and contrast the different methods. Analysis. Write an essay explaining what method for eradicating poverty you would choose. Make sure you justify why you would use this method. Explain. Provide support. Comment on the implications your choice would likely have on you and on the other people involved. Inference. In your essay, support your position with specific points you noted during your analysis of the material studied in class. Cite your sources. Explanation again. just a note about the prompt, that when I didn't ask them to eradicate poverty in your country, in New York City. Therefore, we couldn't really assess inference, and it's actually good to make this discovery. So next time, my next assignment will be context specific. So then they can infer more. Oh, so now Maria is going to talk. So we took essays. We we graded them according to the rubric, and Maria is going to talk about these results.
All right, so this was a classroom research. This was classroom research. So we had an extraordinarily large sample size of 12, and we had 2 raters. So the first thing we did is we tried to norm ourselves. So we took 2 students' essays. We chose randomly 2 students' essays, and using the rubric, we sat down together and argued it out. Like, I would give it this for analysis. What would you give it? And we sort of went through and normed ourselves that way. And then we took those essays and we just put them back in the bunch and forgot about it for a week. Okay? And so then we went back and separately rated all of the essays using the rubric. Okay? And so I'm going to give you, could you just slide? Thank you. So I'm going to show you some limited evidence of the score validity that we came up with. And then we're going to share with you examples from the student essays of the different rubric components. So let's go to the quantitative. Now remember that we removed inference. We removed the inference subscale from the analysis because we didn't feel it fair to judge the students, to evaluate the students on that component when we hadn't elicited that with the prompt. It wasn't fair. And our reliability was abysmally low on that scale, so we had to remove it. So the way that I came up with the students' total scores is to average their scores across the rubric components. So 5 rubric components times 2 raters, that's 10 scores averaged together for their total score. Remember that the highest in the scale could be a 6, and the lowest could be a 1. Okay? So the minimum score was 1.6, and these were first drafts of the students' essays. We wanted to see what they could do just right off the bat. The maximum was 5.8, so that gives us a range of 4.2 with the median of 2.65 and the mean of 3.13. There's quite a bit of variation in the data, large standard deviation, and it was slightly skewed with most of the scores towards the lower end of the distribution, which is what you would expect in a first draft. Almost all the score levels were represented though, so we were pleased. So let's just see what that looks like in a histogram. So as I said, most of the scores were towards the lower end, and we had a few who were really good at this. Even on their first draft, they showed quite a lot of skill. So now let's look at our reliability. Our overall, and I used Cormack's alpha for this because I wanted to replicate what was done in the study. So our overall, let me just give a quick explanation of a reliability coefficient, because I'm not sure that everybody will be familiar with that. So this would range between 0 and 1. Higher is better. So we're looking at to what degree Babi and I would rank order the students' essays the same way. Okay, so if indeed we are agreeing on what the different scale components represent and what they mean, then that should be high, right? You should have a high rate agreement. So I was very, very pleased with this. Acceptable, especially for an analytic rubric where reliability indices coefficients tend to be lower. But I was very pleased with this. Over 0.7 is considered acceptable. And actually we had higher Cormack's alpha reliability coefficients than the study writers. What do you know? Okay, so overall that's higher, and that's normal because there's more data, so that index would be higher. And then for each of the 5 scales that we included in the analysis, those were the coefficients. So very good. And that contributes toward the validity of the scale. That's saying that there was something real. There was something real in the rubric that we were seeing the same way and that we were judging consistently. So now, just go to the next one. This is just for the numbers-oriented, more numbers-oriented parts of the audience, because the sample was so small and because the data was not robustly normal, the distribution wasn't normal. I also calculated these with Spearman's rho, which is just a different kind of correlation coefficient. But we can see that the correlations were all above the acceptable level with the exception of explanation, and were all significant at 0.01. So this is a bit of a mystery, but the other correlation coefficients that I calculated, they all came out at the acceptable level. So, after we determined that our reliability was okay, and that's always the first step, right? Because if we're not reliably interpreting the scales, then the whole thing is garbage and you have to throw it out. But after we determined that our reliability was okay, then we looked at the scale correlations. And the idea here is that when establishing an argument for the validity of an assessment instrument, you need to make sure that what you are measuring is what you say you are measuring. In an analytic rubric with various subcomponents, you would expect that those scores for the subcomponents would correlate, right? Because they're all part of a larger construct, critical thinking. But if they correlate too highly, 0.9 and above, 0.95 and above, what would that indicate?
Too similar.
They might be the same thing. They might be exactly the same thing. Now again, just being super cautious because our sample size was really small. But this is what I got from the correlation coefficients, and what you can see probably right away is that they're all high. They're all high. They're all significant and high, especially between interpretation and evaluation, and between analysis and evaluation. So, what I took from that is that the way that these skills manifested themselves in the students' writing was such that they were often mixed, very mixed. Like in one paragraph, the student would be interpreting, analyzing, evaluating, and explaining. So whereas you could say, oh yeah, here they're doing this and here they're doing that, you could also say that they're doing many other things at the same time. There were, however, examples of students who only did one thing, or who only did two things, and didn't add the other components in as well. So we find this to be useful as for looking at the students' essays in terms of, are they doing all of these different things? But even more, we think that this rubric can be useful as a teaching tool. Okay? So now I'm going to turn it over to Babi, who's going to show you some excerpts from students' writing.
So here is an example of interpretation where the student could explain correctly how the Grameen Bank operates based on the video we watched. So I'll give you a moment to read. I don't need to read it out loud. Okay, so just taking information from the YouTube video they watched and then saying it using their own words, so they understood. This is an example of analysis, and analysis is putting two things together. I think Judy referred to sometimes this synthesis when the students just regurgitate what they've read but don't get to any conclusion. I think that resonates with this rubric, because if they just put things together but don't evaluate and don't explain why they got to that conclusion, the writing is weaker than of another writer who does that. So I just want to leave this slide up for you to read how they put the three methods together. They are explaining them. And of course there is interpretation. So I just want to point out the language here. They say, in contrast to the Grameen Bank, in opposition to the Grameen Bank and Rescue Mission, the give directly, blah, 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 blah. So it's the language for comparison and contrast. There is an example. If we look at the whole paragraph, the student is evaluating Rescue Mission, and this student is basically saying that it's not a good way to eradicate poverty. But there is this position at the beginning. So she says, on the one hand, most poor people claim that they feel satisfied and grateful for what Rescue Mission did for them. Their quality of life has changed dramatically in the short term. However, a great number of news and scandals have exposed that some charity organizations didn't use the donations properly. Instead, people in charge of those organizations took advantage of it and took the money into their own pockets. People started criticizing, saying those charities do not help people at all, but turn it into a place to make money. Moreover, handing out life supplies can only help the poor in the short term. Their life is no different after a while, right? So she's evaluating this method, but with this position at the beginning, it's what we normally say, go and look at the other side and then present a rebuttal. And then the explanation. So I'll give you some time to read. So explanation can be to support your argument or to say this method doesn't work, and here's why, and support it with data from the source texts or from their research if they are doing at-home writing. Thank you. And before you read, I just want to talk a little bit about this position, because this position is the being able to objectively visit the opposing point of view, and it could just see that yes, the Grameen Bank or this other organization could help people in this way, but the one I chose is better because X, Y, and Z. But this position could also be that you choose one method for eradicating poverty. In this case, when you read, you'll see the student is talking about give directly, which is the one he says is the most effective. However, he is pointing out flaws within this system, that it's the best one to ameliorate the problem, but it's still flawed because there are still problems in Africa that cannot be solved simply by handing out cash to the poor. So I'll just leave you a minute for you to read this. So it's not the be-all and all, because their economy strongly relies on the world economy, and so just giving cash cannot solve that part of the problem.
Can I just show you where we're where we really found the disposition here is that their experiments in Kenya, Uganda, and Liberia show a little bit different results depending on the country's internal situation. So it's not perfect. I'm being honest here. However, most cases are very positive. So sort of super reasonable approach to the data rather than just kind of a one-sided, this is my team and I'm sticking with it.
The tunnel vision
Yeah.
that you had mentioned.
That's what we saw as disposition.
So another way that it helped the students was the students who are not used to writing or thinking critically would say, well, the give directly is wonderful. So give directly does this, give directly does that, give directly does the other. So this was her essay, and I just put in bold give directly's approach, so on and so forth. Draft 1. So in the feedback, I told the student, look, you have to look at the other sources. We studied 3, but there may be even more. So her second draft has Grameen Bank, Rescue Mission, give directly. And now Maria is going to talk to us about how we modified the rubric based on the research.
Okay. So this is the original rubric from the study. Would you like to use this to grade your students' essays? And this is only development, it's not grammar, it's not vocabulary. And we thought that this would be, and for a large-scale study like the one that they were reporting on, maybe this was appropriate. But for classroom use, and especially when you're using it for teaching, we felt that this was a little bit overwhelming for teachers and students alike. So we thought that maybe we could use what we've done to modify the rubric and make it more useful for us and for other teachers and students. So the way that I did this was that I combined, there are 6 score levels here, 6 for every rubric component. And I combined score levels 5 and 6 as well as score levels 1 or 2 for greater differentiation between the score levels. So I squished the top and I squished the bottom and left the middle intact. Okay? I combined the analysis and evaluation scales based on the very high correlation between those 2 scales, and also from our substantive reading of the students' essays, we found that evaluation entailed analysis, that it was impossible to do one without the other, and so it just made sense based on our small sample to combine them. But it's still a question whether that needs to be done. I simplified the language and shortened the descriptors for ease of use, and then I removed the mention of context from disposition as this is addressed in inference. So, yes, so now we will show you our modified rubric. Explaining this a little bit while Babi is handing it out. So you have the whole thing there in your hands, all of the scales. And I'm going to just point out to you the scales one by one, starting with interpretation. So at the highest score level of 4, the student clearly identifies all the major viewpoints, accurately interprets source material, possibly with precision and detail, and demonstrates a confident ability to work with the key concepts and terminology. So that would be like plus, beyond my expectations, right? Then at the score level of 3, the student identifies the major viewpoints, interprets source material, and demonstrates ability to work with the key concepts and terminology. So that would be like, okay, you did it. That was what I expected you to do. So throughout the rubric, that's what 3 means. Whereas 4 is beyond my expectations, plus 3 is, okay, you did it. 2 is, there's something wrong. So in the case of interpretation, maybe identifies only the basics of each viewpoint, possibly relying on quotes or lifted text. Interprets some source material, possibly with some inaccuracies. So you didn't read, you misunderstood what this author was saying. And demonstrates an uneven or a shaky ability to work with the key concepts and terminology. So there was an attempt made, but it's not there yet. And then 1, the lowest point, does not identify all the viewpoints, offers mostly incorrect or no interpretation of source material, and demonstrates extremely limited or no ability to work with the key concepts. So remember that this one was the first two score levels squished together, and the top one was the top two squished together, and I left these pretty much as is. So let's go on to the next one, and I'm not going to read all of these to you right before lunch. I wouldn't do that. Okay, but I said that we decided to combine analysis and evaluation. So let me just take you through let's show you the high point and the low point. So plus here would be presents a thorough analysis of similarities and differences among all major viewpoints and thoughtfully evaluates all major viewpoints. And like I said, we found that the students combine those two things in their writing. So just two bullet points, one on the analysis and one on the evaluation. All the way down to the bottom of the scale, presents little to no analysis of similarities and differences between the major viewpoints and evaluates few or no viewpoints. Okay? And 3 would be yes, you did it, and 2 would be something's missing. Okay? And now moving on to inference. Okay? I really simplified this a lot. So again, assuming that the prompt called upon the students to take those new concepts and terminology and apply them to a specific context, to a new situation, that's what you need in order to apply this scale. So 4 would be demonstrates confident, surprising, or insightful ability to apply key concepts to the provided context. And I think many examples of Judy's writing that she showed in her plenary really showed us that. Wow, that's really insightful, right? Okay? Okay, and then all the way down to the bottom of the scale, little to no ability to apply the concepts. The next scale is explanation. This one I think you're so familiar with if you teach writing, because it's how do they provide evidence to support their points of view. So 4 would be integrates multiple sources to support conclusions, truly integrates the sources, that clearly justifies assumptions and reasons with evidence, so shows as well as tells, and demonstrates warranted conclusions by using strong and persuasive reports. That would be the top of this scale. And at the bottom of the scale, the student refers vaguely or not at all to sources, seldom or never justifies assumptions and reasons with evidence, and conclusions are limited, fallacious, or unsupported. And the last one, disposition. I really simplified this as well because there is a lot of philosophical language going on that I think would be really kind of tough for the students to interpret. So I said for the highest score, level 4, demonstrates a relativist view of knowledge by fairly considering all viewpoints. And it should be said, and that develops a consistent point of view. And it's not just that we all have different points of view and that's okay and let's go home. It's we all have different points of view, and for this particular situation, I think this one is best because of this evidence. Okay? And then 3 would be demonstrates an understanding of the existence of multiple viewpoints, but that's kind of as far as it goes. 2 would be demonstrates an understanding of the existence of multiple viewpoints, but struggles to evaluate these diverse perspectives. And the lowest would be focuses on only one side of the issue or treats the issue in terms of good and bad or right and wrong. All right. So now I'm going to hand it over to Babi to talk a bit about our conclusions and some implications for teaching.
So how does that inform our teaching? One of the things I found is that when giving feedback to students in writing, we normally say, oh, you need more depth of development.
Tell me more.
Tell me more, but
Okay.
what does that mean? So it's not reinventing the wheel, but it's putting what we already know within a framework that's easy for us to understand and to communicate to students. So that's what this study revealed to me. Oh, okay, so we put it in drawers and we know what drawer we have to tell the student. This drawer is full, it's beautiful. You have to put more things here. You need to open this drawer. It's closed, you know. Anyway, so can you analyze both points of view? before you get to your opinion, to your conclusion, can you use the sources to explain why you are making this claim? So, explanation. These are mere interpretations of the materials we studied in class. Can you evaluate them? In other words, are you just describing to me what we've just read using your own words? Can you say where they are effective, not effective? You mentioned opposing points of view, but you did it superficially. Can you develop that? In other words, they love to, they say the third body paragraph should be the rebuttal body paragraph, where they put one sentence that acknowledges that there is another point of view, however, and then they say what they have said. So to make it real university academic writing, can you really visit this opposing point of view? So this is in terms of critical thinking. In terms of language input, we were sitting yesterday and or the day before and thinking about this presentation, saying, look, this is really linked to the language that we teach. The course books for writing are divided into compare, contrast, cause and effect. Comparison and contrast is analysis. Cause and effect is inference. Interpretation could be the different reporting verbs, concedes, contends, argues that. And this position lends itself to the hedging language, not say that's wrong, even though, or language of concession, although blah, 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 the truth is da, 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 da. And I think the biggest gift of all is also, we talked about reading and maybe viewing and seeing a painting, but reading a text critically when leading to writing. Not just say we learn to write by reading, what I said at the beginning, but we provide the students with a framework to critically read text so they can improve the use of critical thinking skills in their own writing. Do you have any questions? I'm going to pass out the handout, which is the Nicholas Kristof with our interpretation of his cognitive skills.
We annotated the text according to what we thought, what cognitive skill or rubric skill we thought he was using. And Babi did this with her students as well in a less formal way.
Does anybody